with the NBA playoffs continue to march forward, and as we get closer to the NBA Finals and the start of postseason, we're starting to get some rumors about potential Chicago Bulls free agent targets that are probably going to be re-signing with their team. We're going to talk about what that may mean for the Chicago Bulls, especially when it comes to a replacement center if Nikola Vucevic does leave, and other targets that the Bulls could pivot to in free agency. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
All right, Bulls fans. So before we get started too far, I know that Stacey King recently on his show talked about Dillon Brooks and said that, he does think that the Chicago Bulls should go after Dillon Brooks. And a couple of you guys have asked me about it. Actually went in right before I started recording, sent me a tweet about it as well. And I'm just going to say this. My thoughts and feelings on the whole Dillon Brooks scenario has not changed. I think that Dillon Brooks and the headache that he brings is not something that the Bulls are currently ready to take on. I think with a team that lacks leadership and things like that, which we do have, yes, we have mentorship with DeMar DeRozan, but we really lack leadership. That is why we went out and had to get Patrick Beverley at the buyout market to really bring some leadership to this team. I'm not of the mindset of bringing Dillon Brooks to this team, but I've said it even on that episode. The basketball of it all, if you take away the character concerns, right, and not just the antics, I'm talking about the character concerns. That's different from antics. If you take that away, the basketball that Dillon Brooks plays, the not amazing defense, because he's not an amazing defender, and the stats point to that. He's a solid defender on a team that needed defense. He can put the ball in the hoop some, not an overly efficient scorer, but he can score as well. I understand that and that type of need for the Chicago Bulls team. I just personally think and hope that the Bulls can find better character guys to fill that spot, and that's probably going to take less money as well. So, that's kind of, I've heard Stacey King. I understand his thought process behind it. It's not necessarily a thing that I share, that I agree on. But again, if the Bulls do sign a Dillon Brooks, which AK typically doesn't make questionable character signings, but if he were to bring him in, hopefully that means that they bring that with the understanding. And it may be that Dillon Brooks may have to fight his way back into the league, as far as not really back into the league, but he may not get a guaranteed huge deal to start off with. And so if the Bulls take a calculated risk like that, I mean, maybe. I'm not, like I said, me and Stacey will do an episode over the course of this summer as well. When Stacey comes on, that probably be one of the things that I bring him on, especially if I get him on here sooner rather than later before free agency starts. So be on the lookout for that. But all right, let's go ahead and get into the playing content for today. And that is, we're starting to get rumors about free agents in this upcoming offseason. And they all seem pretty credible, pretty solid. And some of these are players that the Bulls could have targeted if Nikola Vucevic does leave in free agency. So that well is starting to dry up. But I also think that kind of dries up the free agency money that may and teams that may be interested in Nikola Vucevic out there. So the first one up is Jakob Poeltl. He's reportedly a lock to return to the Raptors on a deal that's going to be about $13 to $15 million per year, the same money that Patrick Beverley claims he wants, but I think Jakob Poeltl is much more worthy of that level of money currently right now. But, that was kind of my de facto number one target. If Vooch did leave in free agency, I would have loved the Bulls to be able to go out and get a Jakob Poeltl. Doesn't seem like it's likely to happen, especially with that team and the new coaching staff that's coming in. And I do think that they're gonna change some things on that roster to kind of make a little bit more sense. But when you look at just how good Poeltl has been for the Raptors after they made that midseason trade for him, I can understand why they wouldn't want to let him go. They just need to kind of break up some other things on that team. So that makes sense there. Next up is Kristaps Porzingis is expected to opt out but re-sign a more longer-term deal with the Washington Wizards, him and Kyle Kuzma. I guess we'll talk about both of them together. Now, Kuz was always somebody that I would have loved the Bulls to be interested in. I never really fully believe that the Bulls can open up enough cap space to sign him with, again, avoiding that luxury tax. But Kristaps Porzingis was somebody that a couple of you guys brought up in the last video about replacements for Vooch. And it seems like both those players are going to be opting out of their current deals to re-up with the Washington Wizards. And some people may say, why are the Wiz doing that? I look at that and say, the Wiz are really locking themselves into mediocrity. Some say that the Bulls are too. So hey, listen, we're the Spider-Man meme. We're looking at each other, both doing the same shit. But when you look at it, it could free up some instant money for them as far as if they both opt out and re-sign for deals maybe a little bit lower of a starting salary, but longer, long term, and more money over more time. It could free up some things, give a little bit of cap relief for the Washington Wizards as they maybe then give it another year before they really try to break up that roster. So, there's some things to be pointed at there as well. But both those players are expected. Kristaps Porzingis is an interesting one. While if the Bulls lost out on Nikola Vucevic and Kristaps was just the guy that they just brought in to kind of replace that, I wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't be a huge negative, I don't think. But again, when it all points down to it, I think that, Nikola Vucevic is going to be re-signed for the Bulls or signed and traded, right? And that's kind of the next thing we're going to get into. I really do think that as we start seeing some of these free agent destinations, dry up and some of the places that make sense, it's either going to be Vooch is going to re-sign with the Bulls or he's going to be signed and traded for a team that doesn't necessarily have the cap space, but wants Nikola Vucevic on their roster and is willing to give up assets to make it happen. And I think that's where we may be headed to with Vooch. If you look at sign and trade options, absolutely the Dallas Mavericks still pop up in there, especially looking at what they could be willing to do if they do or can't re-sign a Kyrie Irving. We've already talked about it on a couple episodes last week. What they could potentially do as far as a double sign and trade for Christian Wood and Nikola Vucevic if the Mavs just want Vooch and maybe Christian Wood doesn't find the destination that he wants or the money he wants out there, the Bulls could pivot in that situation, and that could be mutually beneficial for both teams. Again, none of these are perfect scenarios. None of these necessarily bring, what we need as far as rim protection and things like that. But if Vooch does leave at that point, you're just trying to make sure that you mitigate those losses as best you can. Keep in mind, Vooch walks away for nothing. The Bulls just don't, that the money that we would have signed him for doesn't just convert to free agent space where we can just go out and sign a free agent for what the money we were about to give Vooch. That's not how it works, especially when you're over the cap but under the luxury tax, as the Chicago Bulls usually maintain being. So, we'll see, man. We'll see. Ultimately, I just, with how quiet it's been, anything that we have heard really seems to point towards the Bulls being extremely motivated to keep Nikola Vucevic. The ball is really in Vooch's court, right? It's really in Vooch's court. It depends on what Vooch's motivations are, right? And when you look at that, is it Vooch wants to get as close to contending for a title and probably what would be his last big contract in the NBA? Or does Nikola Vucevic wants to go to a team, regardless of kind of the level that they're at, and just wants to be prioritized more and used more effectively in the offense? If that's the case, it opens up the doors to almost anything for Nikola Vucevic, right? Or is his primary goal, as he said, the Bulls will have first priority? Does he want to stay in Chicago? Maybe he just wants some caveats, some things to make sure that he is going to be utilized a little bit better, and also maybe want some insurances that this team is going to improve the roster so that it's just a better situation for him and the team could hopefully get more wins. So that's kind of the things you're looking at maybe when it comes to Nikola Vucevic in this free agent market. It is what it is. But now with some of the free agent targets drying up for the Chicago Bulls, who are some free agent targets that the Bulls could pivot to? First up that I'm going to mention, even though I think he's more likely to remain with the Timberwolves, is Naz Reid, right? I'm not of the mindset. We had a caller not too long ago that brought up Naz Reid and thought that Naz Reid is the perfect replacement for Vooch. He'd be a much better starter. I'm not necessarily in that camp. But I will say this, if Vooch does leave for nothing, and if Andre Drummond leaves as well, and the Bulls are left holding the bag, wondering who's going to be their starting center, because we know they're not going to pivot to Marko Simonovic, Naz Reid could definitely come in. When you look at everything that his skill set, he is a solid shooter, right? Is solid with rim protection. Yes, he's small for the center position traditionally, but that may play into what Billy Donovan wants to do overall. Better rim protector than Nikola Vucevic as well at this point in his career, and is younger and fits that timeline. But the thing is I believe he's a restricted free agent, which would mean that the Bulls would probably have to overbid to get him, unless the Timberwolves, with their cap situation and what's going on with Cat and Rudy Gobert there, unless they're just priced out. They look at the new CBA, maybe they just feel they're priced out. But again, Naz Reid, I think, is more so a lock. I think they need him. I think more so they may look to break up that Cat Rudy Gobert dynamic, bring Naz Reid back because he can play next to either one of them. That's kind of my mindset there. But another one that we've brought up before is Mo Wagner, right? And while I don't like using the per 36 minute stat to just say what a player's impact is going to be if they get 36 minutes, I feel like the 30 per 36 minute stat is better utilized when you have a player that is gets close to 36 minutes and you just want to kind of get a little bit more in there to kind of figure out what they're going to be a little bit more. That's where I feel like per 36 is utilized better. But Mo Wagner as at per 36 minutes averaged 19.5 points per game, 8.4 rebounds, 2.7 assists and 1.2 steals. Listen, while I don't think that I'm not in the camp that is like you just bring in Mo Wagner, he's your starting center. I think I look at Mo Wagner more if Andre Drummond does leave, I would love the Bulls to then pivot to a Mo Wagner. Like, I would love the Bulls to be able to do that because I think at that point in time, you're getting a much more well-rounded backup center. Now, it's still up for it's up to Billy Donovan to actually use him, right, and correctly, but I like Mo Wagner's skill set. I love it on potentially on the Chicago Bulls team. You look at what he's already been able to do with that Orlando Magic team coming off the bench. His true stats last season, 10.5 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists on 50% shooting from the field, only averaging 19 and a half minutes per game, and only starting 18 out of 57 games for the Orlando Magic last season. I look at Mo Wagner and say this could be a solid pickup, especially if Andre Drummond and or Vooch leave in free agency. Mo is very solid. Can stretch it out 31% from behind the arc, so not anything like a lockdown shooter or anything like that, but does bring a lot of things for the Chicago Bulls in that area. Next up for the Bulls that they could pivot to if all the other center targets are gone and Vooch still leaves, Jackson Haize, right? And while I don't think that Jackson Haize personally is ready to be a starting level center, at that point, the Bulls could be left holding the bag and have to go after whoever they have to go after. Jackson Haize, who's, again, per 36-minute stats, 13.8 points per game, 7.8 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.2 steals, and 1.1 blocks per game. Not amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but solid enough to where, especially if we change our offense a little bit more, change that shot profile, shoot a little bit more threes, maybe actually fight for offensive rebounds instead of ceding the offensive rebounds like we do now. Not Mo Wagner. Jackson Haize could be a solid pickup. Again, kind of somebody I'm looking at more as a backup situation for the Chicago Bulls. But what this all means is that, guess what? If Vooch and Drummond leave, if they both are just dead set on not returning to the Chicago Bulls this offseason, the Bulls don't have a lot of options. They just don't. We don't have a lot of options or scenarios to where we can easily replace them. That is why I do think that it's more likely than not that we will see Nikola Vucevic resign. I think the Bulls are going to match any offer that Vooch could possibly get there out in free agency. The biggest question there remains is what is Nikola Vucevic's what are his motivations, right? Does he really want to be here in Chicago? Because if he wants to be here, I don't see a scenario in which the Bulls don't bring him back. That's my personal situation. Now, one could also say, well, hey, if that was the case, why didn't they sign him to an extension during the season? And I agree with it. That is one of the biggest questions here is that why, if the Bulls know that they want to re-sign Vooch, did not get an extension done, because it was rumored before training camp even opened that they were talking extension. And then we heard that they really didn't talk extension at all during the season. Big questions there. And then if you don't plan on re-signing him, if you're not willing to do whatever it takes to re-sign Nikola Vucevic, why didn't you explore options to trade him at the trade deadline? Optics be damned, right? You have to put yourself in a position to best use your assets. And with the Bulls being a franchise that is not going to go into the luxury tax, I just feel like if the plan is not to re-sign Nikola Vucevic here, you really shot yourselves in the foot long term. Like I said, unless they really think Marco's somehow some secret weapon down there for him, I really don't know. I don't understand what the Bulls' mindset is going into this offseason. And that's why it's really so hard to really kind of predict what this team's going to do, right? What are they going to go after? What are going to be the team's motivations this offseason heading into free agency? We just don't know. And the Bulls may be waiting to see what happens with the draft lottery, which goes down in 8 days is when the draft lottery goes down. So be on the lookout for us to be live during that draft lottery process, because if the Bulls do somehow luck into and hold on to their draft pick, that may potentially completely change the Bulls' plans in this offseason if they get a top 4 pick, because then they may actually get a player that they do look at as a true cornerstone, and then we may see a lot of things change with this team. Or we can see this team just look at the draft as an influx of talent and keep some things the same, but really use that new draft pick as being maybe the 3-point shooting they need. I really don't know. That's really what's the craziest part of this whole offseason process for the Chicago Bulls. We do not have a clear path. We have things and goals that we know this team needs. We know we need more shooting. We know we can use a 3-and-D wing. We know we can use more shot blocking and rim protection. We know we can use all those things. But the biggest question is that does AK and Eversley look at it that way, right? The more and more I go back to that season-ending press conference from AK, I really get the feeling that he really does think this team is closer than what we see with our eyes. And if that's the case, man, I really don't know what this offseason is going to look like for the Chicago Bulls. But we'll end up seeing. We'll cover it right here every day on Chicago Bulls Central. That's it for me for today. Make sure you're following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, you want to leave a text message and our voicemail. We're doing more kind of mini mailbags throughout the week, not every single day, but if you leave a great voicemail with a great topic, I won't wait till the weekend to play it. So if you want to leave a voicemail, text message, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related because of you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.